I have to make sure too, we talked about
Awesome.
you during
We
start. Oh,
are live. So, hello to our Facebook friends,
hi.
our GPC family, our cousin neighbors. I don't know who you are, but we're glad you've joined tonight. We're so excited for another roundtable discussion. And per your request, we continue to talk about Black Lives Matter. And as a church, we believe that Black Lives Matter is not a trend. So we'll continue to talk about it and figure out how to help us as a community process it, as long as it becomes an issue and as long as you want us to keep having this conversation. And today we have I have a special treat for you. I have a special treat for you. We've got two of my most favorite people in the building. We have Miss Julie Bucheri. You can wave to the people. Hi.
Hey,
Uh,
everybody.
she's she's not just my favorite person. She's an educator who's been working within the education system here in Massachusetts. Brings to us some wealth of knowledge working in that field and also personal experience. And then we have Rihanna Bucheri. Yes.
Hi.
Yes, recently graduated high school student who's now about to go to college. So we're excited, and I'm so glad we have the different generations. This was actually like intentional, because in a lot of our conversations that we've been having here, we've been very intentional in having different generations represented, because we believe that if we're gonna grow, we have to grow together as a group. So we have Generation Z represented with Rihanna. There's a millennial in the building. Hello, 90 babies. We out here. And then we have Generation X, correct?
Mhm. I'm
Yes.
on the cusp, X and baby boomer, so right in between.
It's okay. We'll keep you on the X side. She's
Okay.
Generation X. So to anybody who's coming in, you know what to do. Please feel free to comment, share, let us know where you're joining in from. We'll take questions at the end of the broadcast. We'll start having a conversation, but please pop in your questions, your comments, everything, so that we can be able to respond to you. But without further ado, we're gonna go ahead and start our conversation tonight. So I'm excited. I'm excited. And anybody who's watching, please remind me. I have something to tell you. There's something special about this group of people that I need to tell you, but you're going to find out at the end. You have to stick to the end to find out what the
Ooh.
secret special thing about them. Hi, Delise. Thank you for coming. All right. So I have a question. Well, welcome, because I'm so excited. I'm ready to jump in. So breathe, John. Yes. So I have a question I ask anybody that always come on this panel to talk about Black Lives Matter, and we're gonna let Rihanna take the lead one on this. And the question I always ask everybody is, when was the first time you ever became aware of racism? When you were like, this is a thing. Like, so for you, or Rihanna, when was the first time? Maybe there's not a date or month, but like, how did you become aware, and when did you become aware, and how was that like for you?
It's so hard to pinpoint. I don't even know. I mean, it had to be. I mean, obviously we like learned about it, kind of like, like the whitewash, like racism in school and stuff, and learning about like slavery and history. So I learned about that. I don't. So obviously, like I always knew like what it was from that,
Okay.
and then I don't even know. Like I think it was in probably in middle school, like where I really noticed it, like in the present time, and I saw it happening in the
Okay.
news, like in my classrooms. I mean, and stuff like that. I think it was in middle school, probably around seventh grade.
Was there like a specific, or maybe there wasn't, but was there specific events that made you notice it in the present, like in middle school, that made you be like, I don't know about this one?
Like a death or something, like Black Lives Matter. Yeah, it was probably. I really like. I can't remember like something
Yeah.
specific, but it was probably like a death because of police brutality or something. Where I was like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I just know that wouldn't happen to me, and I know that's not right.
Yeah.
Um, And yeah, I think that has always been on my radar
Yeah.
around that time. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. And there's a reason why I asked that question, because racism is an ongoing issue and we all have heard about it, but it's different when you become aware of like, oh, this is still a thing and it's so present. Uh, but what about you, Julie? Like, do you have, oh, it's been years and ages, you were born knowing something was wrong.
I have a story, a really sad story actually, but Michelle Obama, I think, had a sort of a similar on the other side story. When I read her biography, it made me think about this. That when I was in college, I wanted to sublet my apartment to, like, I guess I grew up in a very progressive family. Everybody loved everybody. Like, my father had been in the army and he had traveled all over the world and, been a merchant marine. And he was just very open to different cultures. So I just grew up in a very loving household in that way, where there wasn't like a direct, I don't remember experiencing like racism or seeing, like, my brothers had a couple of black friends and I just don't remember seeing it as a child. And I knew it existed, sort of like Rihanna said, but it wasn't until I was at the end of my sophomore year of college and I was going to sublet my apartment. And I was bringing people over to look at my apartment, and this young woman came over and looked at my apartment and was like, oh, I'm a nursing student. Okay, this apartment would be good. I said, great, come meet my roommates and probably you can move in. I'm moving out to take an internship in New Hampshire. So I remember she didn't have a car, so I like drove her back to meet my roommates, and my roommates were really silent and really cold toward this woman. And I drove her home and I was like, what was that? Like, what? You didn't ask her any questions. You didn't talk to her. Like, what's wrong with you? And these two roommates that I had, they were both white. One of them was a woman from the South. The other was a Jewish male, and they from New Jersey. And they, the minute that this woman that I had met, this nursing student from Emmanuel College, walked in and sat down in our living room, I could tell that they just couldn't imagine themselves living with a black woman. And I was stunned and so hurt for this woman who I had just not seen this coming, because that's not how I was raised. But that was the first time I personally witnessed like a beautiful, hardworking, thoughtful student who just, wanted a place to live for the summer while and just being shut down by these people. And that was the end of my relationship with these two people. They were my roommates, but they basically were dead to me after that, because I just couldn't, like, I still think about that moment and I feel so bad for this woman, and my heart broke for her. And I just witnessing that humiliation of people just treating her coldly, like they were not going to make an effort with her. It never occurred to me to say, oh, FYI, she's black, she's from Haiti, it was just, it never, anyway. So that's my moment of really feeling somebody's pain and humiliation and being so angry and upset with seeing somebody treated like they were somehow less, like the minute they walked into the room. And it's still like upsets me. It just still I can feel my body starting to overheat when I tell that story.
Yeah. And I think, like, I like, well, I'm glad that you told that story, because racism manifests in like a lot of different ways. So when black people talk about racism, or people of color talk about racism, people think about just police brutality, but on a daily basis, people of color, especially black people, encounter racism on a daily basis. So that's one of the ways where, nobody would think that was racist, but then you look at that and you're like, oh, she didn't even get a
Totally.
chance, to get in the door. The minute you looked at her, you're like, not interested. I can never live with her. So our topic tonight, for those who are just joining us, we're glad you're here. Again, please share, comment, like, feel free to say hi so we know you here. But our topic tonight, we're talking about this idea of being an ally. How do non-black communities, how can they become allies to the Black Lives Movement? And so, as we start talking about how to be an ally, I thought it might be interested if you ladies can help me kind of define to the best of your ability, what does it mean to be an ally? What does that look like? What is it? What does it mean to you to be an ally? What does the word ally mean to you?
I'm going to do a definition and then you talk about being an ally because I like the English. Okay. So actually, the minister of my church, Reverend Laura Hoke, I think is the person who, she did a sermon and she talked about the word ally. And she said that it's from the Latin word alligar, which means to bind to. So I like that image. Like when you're an ally, you bind to another. Like it's about being tied together somehow. So to ally, you bind yourself to others to protect, kind of like, the doctor would bind a wound, like allies bind.
Yeah, I think it's like, it's kind of an evolving term, just in the sense that, when I think about how I'm being an ally, like I'm just being an ally, like where I'm needed, how I'm needed, kind of. But I think it has a lot to do with like amplifying. So in this case, like really amplifying Black voices in a sense that I'm really just there to like amplify and I'm not necessarily like adding any of my own stuff. It's really just like these voices need to be heard right now, and I'm going to use my platform to do that. And also just being educated on what you're like fighting against too. I mean, when it comes to racism, like we just said, it's not just police brutality. It's so broad. It's microaggressions and like cultural appropriation to big systemic racism in all facets, like education, the healthcare system. Like you could really go on. So really just, being educated in what you're fighting against, and then also fighting against racism, like however people are asking for your help.
I like that. I like that idea of it being an evolving terms because, to be honest, I'm still figuring out the lingo. All this is changing and we're all trying to grow. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that it's an evolving term. And I think I really appreciate you saying it's being able to be there however you're needed. So it's not unsolicited, it's not what you think is best for this community, but it's about listening to the needs of the community and figuring out where do you need me and how do I use my privilege, my platform, my resources, my things to be able to bind myself with you and support you whatever way whatever you need me to do, I'm there. Tell me what type of support you need. And I think some people kind of confuse that and they think allyship is just I'm going to stand up and take a tweet or do a hashtag and all that stuff. And I think we'll talk about it a little bit about the do's and don'ts of allyship and how sometimes wrong good intent or wrong impact and how that can be problematic in the end, though it meant something good. Now, why is it important for non-Black communities to be an ally to the movement? According to you, I know both of you right now reside in a predominantly white community. You probably have some neighbors who have different feelings than you. You've traveled different circles and exposed different people than I am. And why do you believe so much that it's important for non-Black communities to become allies to the Black Lives Matter movement?
I mean, there's just always strength in numbers, and this is in no way like a white savior kind of thing, but if my voice like is institutionally, like I'm, as a white person, like my platform is going to be better heard in society, so I can use that to my advantage.
Say certain facets, like you have access to people that are tuning into Joyce's channel. Like you have you have access to people, other white people who aren't going to hear. They're not tuning in tonight because they don't know. They don't have a lot of Black friends, or or older people like we have. Relatives kind of all along the spectrum of understanding and having different ideas about how real and how systemic racism is. And that's something that I think we both spent a lot of time in conversation with people who might have a less nuanced understanding of some of the hardships that have been faced in the Black community. And because we're sort of like, we're just like a little maybe closer to understanding some of the problems that some folks in the Black community might have than people who really don't have any Black friends or who read a conservative newspaper or something like that. Like we're kind of, it's almost like that intermediary sort of level.
Yeah. And one of the things that you and I, Rihanna, have talked about, and I think one thing that has really stood out to me is I've wondered about, it's like, how does this young lady, like, where did she get her sense of justice? Because if we go, you grew up in a different background than I grew up in. Most of your friends look alike. Your circle looks a certain way, and in comparison to your peers, that's just my understanding, my judgment of you. You present to be very socially conscious and being aware of justice. So how does where did you get your sense of justice, knowing that you've had a different background? You were not maybe in school probably exposed to some of, I don't know, I'm just making assumptions here, but I'm always, well, that's one thing that stood out to me. I was like, but where do you get this sense of justice at such a young age, and how did that develop for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like equality in general was just always part of the conversation growing up, and that was just kind of how I was raised. And just equality, like on all terms and stuff, and also just like acting towards equality in the name of equality. And then I think just as I got older, having that background, I just felt more and more empowered to take personal action and like fighting towards that. And I think, having access, like having maybe a slightly different perspective, like you said, than maybe other people in my town, in my like social circle, that allowed me to see inequality. Like I think that kind of helped and mobilized me a little bit more than maybe the typical person in my suburb. But yeah, I can't pinpoint like a specific thing really. I don't know.
I think you answered it well. I think you answered it well about, it goes back to how you were raised, the exposure you've had. And this goes out to you, Julian. For anybody who don't know, this is a mother-daughter duo. And so there's probably a lot of parents that are watching tonight and that are going to continue to work from different walks of life, different communities. How do you raise a socially conscious kid? Because you have an amazing young lady who is standing here and saying she learned it from me. How do you do that? And I think I'm gonna add a second question to add just a layer, and you can answer however you want. For example, in the Black community, there's certain conversations we are having that I wonder if the white communities are having. Right? Every parent across the board, you have the birds and bees conversation. You probably have the conversation about manners and being respectful and caring and understanding. But as a Black community, we are starting to have we've been having an additional conversation, and nowadays it's starting to happen earlier and earlier. And it's a conversation about racism and teaching our kids what racism is at a really young age and how to move and operate in certain spaces. Talking about parenting, how do you raise a social conscious kid? And as a parent or a white parent, and I know you're not speaking for the whole white race, Have you ever had to have conversation about racism? Is this a conversation parents in your circles are having? Because this is a conversation we're starting to have, or we've been having, but now it's starting to happen at an earlier age than before because our kids are at risk.
Yeah, the big question. So one thing I haven't had to do is I haven't had to have exactly like the talk about, the police and all that. I think that's a very important conversation that I learned about that, having that whole conversation about just like the way you need to behave around police, all of that. Um, that's something I had the privilege of not needing to think about that kind of thing. But I do think that, you know, in terms of a socially conscious, trying to raise a socially conscious, the important thing is, that you kind of celebrate different cultures and different people that, celebrate the commonalities that everyone has. Like everybody loves their children. Everybody loves good food. Most people have some sort of a theology that they celebrate, and it could be different depending on where they're from. But that also that we all need to take care of each other. That from so socially conscious. I think when I was growing up. I know you've been teaching Sunday school for a long time, but I remember, this idea that every person that you come in contact with is Jesus. That idea that you are, when you treat the way that you treat a stranger is the way that you were treating. And if you're religious, you think of it as Jesus or Buddha, or that however you're treating that person that you do not know that is who you are. That is who you are. So if you don't have the time and the patience for this stranger, and you can't feed them, clothe them, be kind to them, that is who you are. And if you can, that is also who you are, who you strive to be. So I think that's just really important that we are kind to each other, and that we celebrate each other. And even when Rihanna was little, we'd take her to eat different kinds of food. We'd go to Chinatown and have dim sum, or all these different things that we would do to just have her try different things. And I think that was an important part of trying to bring up a socially conscious kid, to celebrate the wonders of our diversity.
Yeah, yeah. And I know there's some parents watching us will be checking and looking through your comments. If you're a parent and you're watching, how are you dealing with this conversation? How do you raise a socially conscious person, a child? We would definitely like to hear from you. And Julie, you were out here preaching. You're talking about the Bible. You're talking about, there's a scripture in the Bible that says, whatsoever you do to the least of my people, that you do unto me. And a lot of the people are watching in here are Christian, some are not. But for those of us who are Christian, it is, part of who we are. That's why we stand out. That's why we advocate for Black Lives Matter. To be honest, we would have this conversation if it was Asian Lives Matter, if it was White Lives Matter, because we get as Christians, we get a sense of justice from our faith, and our faith really advocates for justice, saying treat each other's kind. So that's why we use platforms like this to usher in these types of conversations, because sometimes people think, don't mix things up, put it to the side. Like, no, it's so enmeshed in who we are as a people. So thank you for preaching tonight. I received that word. Amen. um, Now, what do you say to those people who say all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter? Um, that's still going on. I'm not sure why. And how and Rihanna, I don't want to put you on the spot. I know that we've discussed it, you've at least had one experience where it was happening in front of you, where people are like, wait, what? All lives matter. Why are these people crazy about this whole Black Lives Matter thing? How do you navigate those conversations when you hear it happen in your vicinity? Like, what do you say? How do you make sense of that?
I still like haven't found the best way to get it across.
Yeah.
I mean, I it's just so like frustrating when I hear that, but I mean, the way I think about it, so the way I try to explain it is just like, well, no one has ever said that your life doesn't matter because like you're white, so we don't need to be talking about all lives matter right now. Like the
Mm-hmm.
focus is Black lives because of like the years of systemic racism and oppression. And right now, like they need the amplification and stuff. And yeah, I did have an encounter where there's like these two men and they were like ranting about the Black Lives Matter movement and trying to find a good way to explain that to them was very frustrating, but I was just try to like put some statistics in there and
Mm.
you know say it in like a calm way, which more or less went over well. But yeah, just I still haven't found the best way to say it. I don't, but that's kind of what I have been saying.
Okay.
Yes, I would say to you that I'm proud of you for having a civil discussion with people who might have pretty uncivilized views,
Yeah.
people who, you know, maybe like support Donald Trump and some of his policies, which are so awful. And so just proud of you for that, for like trying to have a civilized conversation, because it's really important. Like, you have these people who don't understand like, all lives matter, and they don't understand why that's an obnoxious thing to say right now. And then you have people over here who just feel so insulted by their insensitivity that they can't talk to each other. So I think we're just trying to be in the middle and be a voice of reason a little bit. And when I think about that question, I think, I don't know if this is a good answer, but if somebody like comes running up to you after they've like escaped a burning car and they're bloody and they're beaten and they're like a mess because they've suffered, they've been pummeled by this accident, you don't say to them, oh, well, you know, I was in a car accident 2 years ago. You don't start talking about other accidents. You go like, are you hurt? Like, let's stop the bleeding. Let's get you fixed up. Let's make sure you're safe. And that's when people are in crisis. That's what we're supposed to do when we see somebody in crisis, is to reach out to them and help them to become whole. And not to say, well, yeah, well, you're not the only person who's ever been in an accident. But that's like that is like what a lot of people seem to say, like, well, all lives matter. And they're not understanding that, of course, all lives do matter, but the lives that the lives that are not, the lives that do not seem to matter to sometimes the police or other entities are right, the lives of Black men, women, and children in our country. And there's just too many deaths. Way too,
Yeah.
statistically, it's just outrageous. Like the discrepancy, that like the numbers are real.
And the constant. Like when we feel like we've grieved, you know, like I can't even watch some of these things anymore because I'm saved. I love the Lord. I have a good heart. But sometimes the trauma, I'm not sure I'm ready to see it. But we just had another case where a whole family was pulled over for for, for a whole car, of car theft, but happened to be a motorcycle theft. And then, as I'm sure every parent is outraged, like, you put kids in that situation, you do not even have mercy, and look like, oh, they're children, they're little kids, and you, like, what do you say to those little kids? Like, so the constant trauma that happens is why we're arguing the Black Lives Matter. And our pastor, like, Pastor VB, said something to me last week, and I think that's my new way of explaining it. And she said something that all lives cease to matter the minute Black lives don't matter. So all lives don't matter if Black lives don't matter. So it's not
I
a,
write that down.
I don't know if I'm rephrasing well, but she says something about all lives seems to matter the minute Black lives do not matter. So if you're an advocate for all lives matter, in other words, there's no reason to be out here shouting about that. You know, Black lives don't matter, then all lives do not matter. And this whole Black Lives Matter movement is not a white versus black or black versus other. It's a humanity versus racism. We are calling and denouncing racism. We're not trying to create a racial divide. We're not out here trying to create division, as some people might think. This is, if you are a human being, you should be outraged by this level of violation and this level of wrong, because it's just wrong. It's us humans standing up against, you know, this thing called racism and how it's manifesting. And as we talk about racism, some of the conversations, there's some terms that we talked about today. We talked about white privilege, but then there's also another white word term called white supremacy that gets thrown in the situation. I was wondering if you can help me unpack. The difference is obvious, but just help me unpack white privilege versus white supremacy. What's the difference? Help me unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, it was only, to be honest, recently where I started, like where I extended my understanding of white supremacy as not just like neo-Nazis and Confederate flags, but really just on the same playing field as just institutionalized systemic racism. It's really how our whole entire society functions is more on the premise of white supremacy. It's not just this like in your face white nationalism, like craziness. It's a lot more secretive sometimes. So that's been something that I've learned recently. I read it. I was reading How to Be Less Stupid About Race by Crystal Fleming. And yeah, that really, I never really thought about it in that way. And that's kind of like the working definition that I use now is more all encompassing. And then, yeah.
This harkens me back to those two people that I lived with my sophomore year, and I never knew there's anything wrong with them. But with the minute they're like, oh, you're different from me. I'm not going to consider living with you. It's like, I don't need to learn anything about another culture because my culture is superior. Like that's on one level. They would probably tell, I'm not racist. I'm just uncomfortable living with people who are different from me. But that's really I think that's white supremacy. It's like, I don't need to come out of my comfort zone because I'm good. The way it is here is good. I'm good. That's not what we think of it as, but it's saying my culture, my ways are superior, and I don't need to learn anything from you, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
ridiculous, and what a sad way to go through life too. Like assuming that you've got everything down, like, and not being open to like all the other amazing things that are out there that belong to other cultures, you know?
Yeah. And I think what I'm learning from this conversation, and I like the way both of you are kind of explaining it, white privilege is a given. You just get it because you're white, right? Just when you're born, you're white. That's it. What I'm learning is that white supremacy is now when you intentionally work to reinforce your privilege. You know, in place, it could be as little as like, I don't just hang out with black people, or it could be as much of let's create policies that are going to, you know, favor our white privilege, our whiteness, and not allow anybody in to be, you know, everybody else must be at a deficit. So it's that intentionality, like you're aware of your privilege, and now even more you are acting on it. Like you know it. It's not just like you know it or it's happening. You have it. Every white person has privilege, but now you're working towards reinforcing that because you think that's the way to do it. So one of the parts, I think for those who just joined us, uh, with our conversation tonight, Miss Julie is an educator in the public school system. I'm sure you have lots of story to tell about how amazing and challenging and grueling that whole experience is. Uh, so I wonder, as an educator, and I think one of the problems that we've listed, and I think Rihanna even mentioned it, is for those of us who went to school here, we're getting half, I don't know if it's a truth, I don't know what to call it. But one of the ways that racism is really being also continuing to like promote is through our school systems. We're getting curriculum that's not telling the whole truth, curriculum that's masking the issues and not wanting to denounce it. So as an educator, how do you promote racial equality in your classroom, in your teaching, in your school? Like, how do you deal with that?
I mean, that's a hard question, and there's no one like easy way to do it. But I think one thing you can try to do is I teach English, and so just having kids read stuff that helps them like just become more global, that helps them to celebrate different people and different parts of the world, and to be open, like, we read a book that's set in Africa. It's called Long Walk to Water and the United States. It's like an immigrant story, and it's based on the story of a man named Salva Dutt, who lives in the United States now and has a charity that goes back and forth and works in Africa. We have guest speakers come in and talk about their experiences, and that's something that can help kids who maybe don't have like a lot of exposure to different kinds of people, like, just get more of the world. We've had some wonderful guest speakers over the year. I don't know whether that there's like they're saving a kind of reveal, but Miss Joyusa Wamahoro has been a guest speaker in my classroom and has done an amazing job of just kind of, being this person who's traveled from different places in the world, and who's been resilient and smart and funny. And I think that having people there to talk to kids from like different walks of life is really important. And then there's so much great, there's so many great, especially like the African American art, like writing. There's just so much really good stuff. Toni Morrison is amazing in high school. Langston Hughes has so many great poems. Kwame Alexander and Jason Alexander are two fabulous new writers. We've got National Book Award winner, Brown Girl Dreaming, Jackie Woodson, like all these. There's so many phenomenal Black writers and poets that are writing for kids at the age level that I teach, that there's just like zero reason not for kids not to be exposed to like all these great artists. So that's another way, is just learning about stories from different cultures, and then the social end thing, that is less, that's less my gig, but I do think that's really important, that kids get a better education about sort of like the whole of American history, and and how the North, we like to think that we were, the South had slaves, North was good. That's like a false narrative. And there's a new curriculum that just came out that's by a woman who works at the New York Times. I think it's called like the 1617. You can Google it.
1619.
1619.
I'm listening to the podcast.
And it's like right on. And I know that I think you introduced me to the book Lies My Teacher Told Me, which is also like really interesting and something that kids should be reading, just examining the narrative in high school about who gets to tell the story, and really, really important stuff.
Yeah. And Rihanna, you just had an interesting conversation with the school committee, with your school committee. So I'll let you say it, because, otherwise I'll end up bragging. So what's the conversation you had with your school committee?
Yeah, I just I teamed up with a friend of mine, and we just kind of at their most recent meeting, we were just like, hey, like we both just graduated. We know what it's like in the school, and we just want to see a little bit more diverse of a curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been lucky. I had had like one pretty good history class where we did look at things pretty critically, and I did learn like new things that I hadn't learned before. But I mean, there was still so much room for improvement. And in the past couple months, I've still like learned parts of our history that like had never come up before. And I was
Yeah.
just so shocked, like, how did this not make the cut in the curriculum? Like, I was just, like, I never learned about, like, the Tulsa Race Massacre. I never knew that, like, Harriet Tubman led soldiers. It was just, like, there's so many things that are missing. So I
Yeah.
talked about those, and I talked about, yeah, I had only ever read one book by a person of color in my whole
Wow.
school. Yeah, and it was
That's
junior
sad.
year, and it was Beloved, which by Toni Morrison. She's a great author, but that book it was really hard to read. Like it's just kind of confusing in general. It's like
It's a late introduction to
yeah, I
writers of
just
color. Yeah.
some like more like I just wanted more diverse readings more early on and ones that were accessible to everyone. Um,
Yeah.
like in all levels of classes, you know. And also, I just talked to them about more school-wide initiatives because we are pretty lacking on those, and we don't talk about race in any capacity. So, yeah, we had a good talk. So I'm really hoping to see some action from them,
It's
and
Yeah.
a
I'm gonna, yeah, follow up.
I
Thank
think
you. Yeah.
it's a hard district to go to if you're a person of color. There's just not a lot of folks who are people of color in the district, and that like if they do need to move more in the direction of a more inclusivity because it just makes it really hard. And I know there are
Yeah.
some people who could speak personally about that if they wanted to.
I went to that school district. I remember like, and my experience is a little bit different because I had just moved to the United States. So I was still learning my blackness. Like I would tell this joke, like I never knew I was black till I came to America. Like I knew I was African. That was part of my identity. But being black was not something that you went black, 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 black. I'm like, okay, I'm a little confused. But I remember being in my one of my favorite class. You remember my speech class? And she
Mrs.
made us
Harvey.
Mrs. Harvey, she made us read Langston Hughes and what was it? Something letter to my English class. I'm forgetting the name
Letter
of
to
the piece.
English B.
The instructor said, go home tonight and write it. Go home and write a
Yes.
page tonight and let that page come out of you. Then it will be true. Yeah, that's Langston Hughes.
I don't know something about it, like, and I knew it was Langston Hughes and I tried to figure out, but I read that and I was like, it just did something that maybe I was being a bit emotional, but I was like, oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. And I think representation matters. So as a black kid, at the time there was two black kids. Well, I'm about to say Littleton High School. As one of the only two black kids and reading a poet, it was black and it was me being introduced to him and how beautiful that was. I don't know, there was something about it and I really believe that, definitely it does matter. And somebody asked me one of my graduate school classes, Rihanna helped me out. And one of my teachers was like, how do schools nowadays do like what is it called? February, what is it? Black
Black
History
History Month.
Month. What our school said doing? And we all sat down, we're like, my high school, I don't know. And we were all kind of criticizing how that was not an effective strategies and how schools are doing that in developing diversity, especially suburban schools. What do you did Littleton High? I don't remember a lot. Like what did you guys do for Black History Month?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Well, I wasn't. I don't think we did anything like all 4 years, and I wasn't really in a history class this year. But yeah, I really can't recall anything specific to Black History Month. I knew I was aware of it, but in schools, I don't think maybe we like acknowledged it verbally, but that would be about it.
So there is this is a good question maybe to put back on you, Joyce, and on other, really everybody in the Black community, like to think about. And that is, I had this professor too in college, Floyd Barber, who was the chairman of the African American Studies Department at Simmons, and his attitude was kind of like, we don't really need Black History Month. Like every month should be Black History Month. Like who gets a month? Like, you know, March is Women's Month. We used to kind of, I think that was, I almost feel like maybe that's like, you know, we want to have certain holidays to commemorate certain things. Like, okay, now Juneteenth is a lot bigger in people's minds now than it was. But you know, Black History Month, it's almost like, would you trade Black History Month in for just having our curriculum be more diverse in general so that you didn't have to have a special month? The shortest month, the very shortest month to celebrate African in the coldest, kind of hard, one of the hardest months. You just can't wait for that month to be over because it's so cold and you're waiting for spring, and that's Black History. You know, there is, I kind of, so I wonder whether it needs to just be that all the way along we're telling stories of different Americans and their journey through our history, and you know, I would never wait until February to read something that's an African American. That doesn't make any sense because there's so many great writers. Like why would you ever put them in a month? I don't know.
The reason why I brought that up is that when talking about racism and education, a lot of the schools' rebuttal is always like, you know, like diversity for them is we have Black History Month. And even when they say Black History Month, it's usually going through like slaves and going through all the different slaves that made it and stuff like that. And it's just, it never lasts a whole month. It's usually maybe like a one time if you're in a history class, and maybe depending on the age and the grade, they might post pictures of like Black people in your hallway, and that's it. And so some school districts might just be like, we're diverse. We host Black History Month. Check. Our kids have seen pictures of Black slaves on the wall and all that stuff. And so that's the challenge of like, really? Like that's not enough. Like you can't say that's enough. So I agree with you. And even those who do practice Black History Month and have curriculum and programming, what I've seen from some of my classmates as we were talking about that, we're all like, none of us remember what Black History Month was about. It was all a blur.
Yeah.
So even that is not a successful way. So I agree with you that if curriculum, you know, and everything else celebrates all parts of American, of what it means to be an American, all the different writers and stuff like that, then, you know, we don't have to pretend and put 1 month and just do one lesson in one history class and put some posters around and say that, you know, that's Black History Month. So now we're going to switch a little bit and we're going to talk about even more about allyship. So we want to talk about do's and don'ts of being an ally. What are some ways our non-Black friends can become allies to the movement? I know, Rihanna, at the beginning you gave some examples, but what are some ways, like if somebody's like, oh, but I don't know how to be an ally, like what are some ways that, you know, we can be allies to the Black Lives Matter movement?
Mm-hmm. I know a little earlier we talked about like having tough conversations, and I think that's so important. And I mean, it is like tough. I just hate confrontation, even when I know I'm absolutely right, you know? So, I mean, it's definitely necessary and to confront like just your family members, or I mean, if strangers, like wherever you see something like people talking in a way that's not right, that's, you know, racist, you have to call them out on it. And I mean, I think it is more times than not beneficial to be as civil as possible and to start out that way. But I definitely think that you have to have those conversations, even if it makes some relationships a little bit strained.
Mm.
And I think asking questions is a good way to do it. So, you know, if somebody says, "Oh, you know, the Italians were persecuted when they got here," you like, which is, you know, people give examples of like, "Oh, this group is persecuted and this group is persecuted." Like that's one thing that white people will say, you know, like that all lives matter, persecuted, and especially older people who can like remember. So yeah, those, I think that's important, the tough conversations, but the more you can just be like, well, yeah, so does the fact that, you know, Italians were not considered white and were discriminated against and had this and this happen to them, how do you think that, or, you know, fill in the blank with whatever ethnicity, Irish, you know, whatever, and say, well, how do you think we can connect that to what's happening right now in the Black community and the way that people are suffering or, you know, being traumatized by the knowledge of this violence? You know, like, see, you're trying to like take, okay, so you're having some memory of your ethnic group's trauma of your own. You're saying something that doesn't seem helpful and seems even hurtful to the Black Lives Matter movement. How can we like just like try to bring you over here a little bit more and like, you know, move, because you're really like, it's like a tug of war. You're like trying to move people a little bit in a direction where they'll have dialogue.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just bang your head against a wall. You know, because
sometimes that's what it is. And I think you mentioned some other things, Rihanna. You were talking about amplifying Black voices and using your platform to amplify Black voices, to amplify Black experiences. Um, I agree with you as well, Rihanna, about being able to learn. And I think that's what you said about the importance of being able to do your research and learn about what's going on. If you really won't care, like make sure to learn what's going on and how this affects your neighbors, and how to be able to best support them. And my biggest advice I always tell to allies, like, before you talk and do anything, sit and listen. Before you stand, just sit for a moment, listen, take that in, and listen to the Black experience, acknowledge that experience. Don't be too quick to uh, go and fix the issue and create some white savior complex situation that ends up being harmful. Are they things that you think like people do or allies? Are they, and we're talking about intent versus impact, are they wrong ways to be an ally? Where maybe the intent hopefully was to be an ally, but it ends up like backfiring, or it's not helpful at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I think good intentions are obviously always like a good start, and it's not always enough. I know like recently there's been a lot of allyship and activism kind of through social media, which I think is good, but there is also, like, I started learning about performative activism, which can be really harmful. And like, I think Blackout Tuesday was a good example.
Yeah.
Posted, and I first read that and it seemed like a good idea, so I did it, and then I read more things that convinced me that okay, that was kind of pointless.
Yep.
And so I deleted it, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna move on. That was a mistake that I can admit to. But then you saw that there is X amount of posts for that Blackout Tuesday, and there were less signatures on the petition calling for like the arrest of the killers of George Floyd. And I think that's a really good example of performative activism and how it can be really harmful. So that's definitely a don't of allyship. And I think there's also different like other examples of performative activism, but yeah, you really just have to listen first and then act. Like no one wants you acting and like no one wants you where you weren't asked, you know? Like
That's really no
Unsolicited.
Sure, that no one wants you where you weren't asked. But Rihanna says she doesn't remember sharing this with me, but we were looking at some, news broadcasts and things, and there was a broadcast of these white girls, and they went up to a Starbucks in like a Detroit neighborhood or something, and they put BLM, Black Lives Matter. They spray painted it on a Starbucks. And then a woman came up to them and said, I live in this neighborhood. What are you doing? You don't live here. What are you doing? Spray painting the Starbucks. And it was, a Black woman kind of confronting these people who may or may not have been trying to be allies, but they were definitely trying to get into the mix. But that was a great example of like sticking their fingers where they didn't belong and destroying property and doing it not in their own neighborhood, and also potentially bringing the wrath of police down upon, the Black community, where they could be shaking down some teenage boys looking for cans of spray paint because these white girls were all, and that really horrified me. So that's a good example of not performative. Thank you for that word, Rihanna. Performative non-allyship, fake ally stupidness. And I just want to say, I love that you have an example of what you see as making a mistake. Like, I did this trying to be an ally, and then I realized this isn't the greatest. I think one way we can try to be allies, and I want to hear more from you, Joyce, is just like to realize that you're going to make mistakes. And I remember we called you a bunch of times about something that we were concerned about, and we just felt like, I don't even remember what it was, but we called you, we talked to Bethany, we talked.
It was a play. It was a play.
It was a play?
The play, the Historical Society play for Littleton.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I got that. Right. So I think that was the play. And then there were even been other things where we've just like been like, what do you think about this? Or I think when Rihanna was going to go to the school committee, we just tried to sort of, she tried to like check in and ask questions first in the Black community before she went to the school committee with these suggestions. But yeah, when we did do it, we had a play that was written by a different person about Littleton, and there was a woman in it who was a slave. And when I read the play, which was based on historical documentation, I didn't like how little like voice she had and how they didn't give her enough self-awareness. And I remember I rewrote the part to make it more, how I thought somebody would, but I also felt very awkward. But I amplified her awareness of the irony of her situation as a slave in Littleton. Yeah, because this woman was a slave in Littleton before the Revolutionary War.
Wow.
And who later sued for her freedom. But anyway, that's another.
That's another story for another day. So I read in this season, I've been really reading a lot and doing a lot of like following different posts and different things. One of my favorite thing about this season is the knowledge sharing, the amount of knowledge sharing that is out there. On, some of it is problematic, but there's some good stuff that you can find. And if you had talked to me about 10 years ago about Black Lives Matter and what I thought about it, I wouldn't have the knowledge of the experience to be able to talk about it. And I think you kind of challenged me about it before because I didn't completely understand the experience coming from a different background and different situation, coming to America as versus being born here. And so what I've been doing in this whole season is just educating myself, because this is continuously evolving, and I just want to make sure that I know what I'm advocating for. And one of the great things is that there are people out in the streets that are really doing a good job of putting wording to the experience. So I read an article, and it was talking about things allies say that end up harming Black people.
Let's hear it.
It had a few things, and I'm gonna list them out. We can talk about it. You tell me what you think. So there's a bunch of points, but I took the main ones that stood out to me. The first one was self-appointing themselves as an ally. So the author is saying allyship is something that is silently earned. It's not performative. It's not a self-declaration. Allies actively work to denounce and dismantle systemic racism. That's how, you become an ally. It's not, doing it for the clout, like the kids say, doing it for the hashtag, doing the black square. So the author is saying, if
Dismantling.
the best way to be an ally is to actively work on denouncing and dismantling systemic racism in whatever circles you're in. Some people have more access and more power, and that means changing policy. But in your daily life, how are you denouncing it? So it's not about coming here and getting a badge and say, I am an ally, right? Every time that's said and people go out there and pronounce themselves, especially about them being an ally, it what I've experienced is that it reads, it kind of, I don't know, it overshadows the movement, and it becomes about you in that moment. So what do you think about this whole idea that allies really is not something that you get up and you declare by yourself? You silently work and you do the work, and by doing the work of denouncing, by doing the work of dismantling, by doing the work of being an ally, like that's how you become an ally. It's not about position that you apply for and you earn. You agree with
Yeah,
her?
I think it's important to always work to be an ally, but I'm never like gonna you can never like act like you know it all. Like I'm
Yeah.
never gonna excuse myself from like accidentally holding a bias. I like know that that's always a possibility. And then you can just never be like, I'm never gonna self-identify as like 100% perfect. I think it's just like a constant thing that you always need to admit to trying your best, but you're not above anything, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And most of what you're doing should be, the sort of like the sort of behind the scenes is like emailing the principal and saying, can we talk about the curriculum? How can we make the curriculum more conclusive? That's not something that's getting posted on social media. That's not something that's like a big like whoa, whoa. It's just like this very, you go to like a really boring meeting with the school committee and talk to them, and there are like 7 people from Littleton watching it, and it's about talking, like doing that. That's yeah. I mean that, or just it is mostly just like stuff you do in your everyday life to try to be aware. I agree. It's a great definition because it's all pretty quiet, but you're doing
Yeah.
stuff, but you're doing it kind of just kind of quietly. And then if you like, like when you've come to my school, we don't really talk about racism. That's not the point. It's just about more like that. Okay, just understanding different people and different people's experiences, and that's like the foundation of making people, I think, less racist in general and more open-minded, is just like celebrating what's good in everybody, and like human resilience and the human spirit and all of that. So, but yeah, I think that's a good definition
Yeah.
of allyship.
There's this whole idea of like love languages, right? You've all heard it. That every one of us has our own love language in ways that we are loved. And so there's gifts, there is words of affirmation and stuff like that. I'm gonna put myself out there and self-disclaim that I'm generalizing. But I think if the Black community in this season had a love language, it would be acts of kindness. Don't tell us about it. Be about it. How are you showing love and concern for my kind, for me as a human being? So I don't need you to post about it. I don't need you to tell about it. I don't need you to like tell me how great you are. Show me. So we are looking for those acts of kindness. The other point that this author so was saying, another problematic thing that allies may do that is harmful to the Black community is when they center themselves in the conversation. So, for example, like you were saying, people starting to compare the Black Lives movements with the oppression they've experienced as a woman, as an Irish person, as an Italian person, and the author here is saying and arguing, and I agree with her, that number one, it's not the same thing. Every oppression has its own difference, and number two, it's irrelevant. That's not the point right now. That's not the thing we're talking about. And so she gives great advice on like how to be an ally, and in 3 steps of like, if you're wondering how to be an ally, take the time, acknowledge the people's experience, and after you've acknowledged the people's experience, listen, and show empathy. I always relate it to like, and maybe that's the psychologist in me, to the experience of a woman who's been sexually abused. That's just my visual that I create to illustrate the point. If a woman has been violated, right? You don't go out there and start being like, oh, you know, one time too, like somebody came over and my dad really hurt me so bad, and he did not give me something I wanted for Christmas, or he neglected me, and I can completely understand, and that's why I stand with you, because I know what hurt is like. No, hurt is different for different people. You don't appropriate and try to compare. You listen, you acknowledge, just like you wouldn't do that for somebody, and acknowledge that these people are coming to you, they're telling you that they've been violated. This is not the moment for you to have therapy session about yourself. Listen, acknowledge the experience, and show empathy. So I know that there's been, in the spirit of allyship, people have come and say, because me too. And I'm like, it's not about you. Just listen, acknowledge, show empathy, and don't compare. And I think it becomes problematic when we start comparing pains in different situations, because it devalues the other person's experience and makes it about you. You had something to say about that?
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think the only word I would like maybe not use is the irrelevant part, but it's sort of like you have to focus on the person who's the person or the group like that's in pain
Okay.
now. And if and that like somebody else's pain from a
Yeah.
different they shouldn't be centering on that. And a lot of people do that even in conversations. Like a lot of people don't know how to like take the conversation deeper about many things, about many things, but it's especially important here because people could be feeling so vulnerable and so traumatized. The mothers of my Black students, I just think, and the fathers, but I always think of the mothers, like going out of their minds when you see like this kind of thing. Like that's a trauma that as the mother of a Black child, you just, that like you
You can
cannot,
only imagine. You can only
you can
imagine. You
only
can't
imagine,
relate or
I can
compare.
only imagine how uncomfortable and hard this is for you now. And I'm so sorry that you're going through this. Yeah. And there is no room for you to insert yourself. Although I guess the only thing that is like people, we all like the idea that, okay, if you have experienced pain, then you hope you take that pain and use it as a place of empathy for the pain that someone else is suffering now, but not as a point of comparison, but more
And
like
I
a place in your heart.
and I think that's what she's saying. Empathy does not compare pain and put pain on the same scale. Empathy is like, wow, like I can only imagine. Like I've been in a situation when things didn't work out for me. Yours is completely different. But I can empathize and imagine because it's different. So it's not about, oh, because you're discriminating against this way, that means, we can have empathy, or because you can be in the same family, experience the same trauma. And when we talk about trauma, and different kids come out dealing with each differently. You don't give the same treatment to everybody, depending, everybody gets affected differently. So when we take that time to let people tell us their experience and take that in and acknowledge, I acknowledge your experience, and I don't have to have a comeback of comparison. I just acknowledge it and I receive it. That's healing. That's more therapeutic for dealing with trauma. And the big one that I've seen a lot of allies do that ends up being problematic is asking Black people for emotional labor. Now, it's so much to explain, but the author did a good job of describing situations that have all happened to me. So this behavior and attitude is not limited to these things, but these are a couple situations of how that happens. Expecting Black people to educate you about racism. As a Black person, I cannot explain how many times well-meaning people ask me to educate them about racism. But even you saw after I read that, I was just like, I tensed up. I'm like, this is my trauma. You are telling me to tell you my trauma over and over and over and over. For what reason? Like, you should learn about this. You should educate yourself. If I welcome the conversation and we're having it, like we've had people, I had one, my friend who was really having a hard time because all of a sudden at her job, she had a coworker, and this coworker kept insisting on talking about to her and reaching out to her about racism and like, let's talk about this. How are you feeling? It was enough, triggering enough for my friend to have a meltdown over it because, like, I have a wound here. Please don't poke in it. Don't ask me to revisit that. It's like telling, and this is probably a wrong comparison, but that's the way I make sense of it in my head. It's like telling, again, a woman who's been abused, oh, tell me more about your abuse. It sounds well-meaning, but every time you have to recount that, it is still hurtful. And with the amount of knowledge that is out there on this book, it's different saying like, hey, I'm trying to learn a bit more and I don't know. Do you have any resources? If I do, I'll say, oh. And I think we've had those conversations where you've come to me and be like, hey, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that. What do you think? Have you seen this? That's different versus now I have to educate about racism. Expecting Black people to, asking Black people to continually share the Black experience. Every time I talk about racism, in this case, it's different because like I'm choosing to do it and it's for educational purposes, but it's hurtful. You're asking me to revisit my trauma, and not everybody does it that way, but there's some people out here who, we're still praying for them, but they have this, I don't know, they're so like, we want to hear the sad story. This some people call it like trauma porn in sense of like they just want to hear the sad story. Tell me about your experience. Whoa, that has happened to you. While I'm telling you about my experience, I'm visiting it. Let me share that. But don't be asking me. I don't even know you from nowhere. We have no relationship. And then all of a sudden, I'm called to a committee at work because they've decided to do a diversity inclusion thing. And now, all the Black people, please share your experience about being Black in America.
They should hire you. If you're going to do it, you should get paid. That is a paid gig, and you know that. We've talked about that. That's a paid
Thank
gig.
you.
Yeah, I'm telling you, that's
Thank
$500.
you.
Okay.
Thank you. Next time somebody asks me, next time somebody asks me to like talk about my experience, I'll be like, "Where's the check?"
Yeah, you need like, you know what? Tell them to call your agent. I'll be your agent, and cut back to green pastures. But it really
Yeah.
is. If people want like I've definitely I'm gonna call myself guilty of like running a ton of things by the some of the Black people in my life recently because it was hard not to, but I was trying to be respectful of people's time and that they might not want to share. And I think we live in such a nosy society too, and it's somebody can ask you a question, any question. And I think even as a woman, we like sometimes you could feel like a people pleaser and want to like, oh well, tell them because they're out. No, yeah, you don't have to tell anybody anything. Yeah, I'd rather not discuss that. That's personal, that's private. I'd rather not bring. That's not something I can really talk about right now. And yeah, get paid to talk about your trauma if you're going to do it.
If I'm gonna do, I like it. You're hired. Next time somebody asks me, I'll be like, my manager is Julie. And another one she mentioned, and I think this has happened maybe once, inviting Black people to attend a protest with you. We've been protesting all our lives. If you want to protest, that's okay. If I invite you, it's okay. But don't be like, I'm going to this protest as a white person and I invite you to come because I think you should come to a protest that I have to do. Like, I may not show up there, but sometimes, oh, and I think I really emphasize the trauma of it because of different levels. There's been moments where I'm like, I'm ready to be in the streets. And there's moments where I was like, that one just put me in. I just can't. I
Yep.
can't do this right now. I need to preserve my emotional sanity. I need to preserve my mental health. Right now, I do not have the power to talk race, do race, be protest. Like there are moments where I'm like, I shut down because it's just a lot that I'm going through. Or, the well-meaning people who sometimes, and this one it's solicited. I think a whole lot of things, and I think Rihanna did a good job saying it has to be solicited. So people who send me articles about how to be an anti-racist, like if you and I have had a conversation about racism, I understand. I know you're feeling self-conscious. You just sent me a post and we've had this conversation. Like I saw you great. You're like, oh, I said something on like Instagram. No, we that was solicited because you and I were talking about something. We're
Yeah, you
talking
asked me
about
the
this
question. I'm like,
conversation.
oh, look, here's the answer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But like people start sending like articles about anti-racism, and I'm like, I know. So there's so much more. Like I don't want to take up the whole time, but those are some of you know, those are some of the things that she mentioned about um about and ways that sometimes allies can can like
Be annoying
be
and not
meaningful, but
helpful.
it ends up having.
It's useless.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Joyce, if you want to say a few more, I'm good because I can only imagine. This is one like I can only imagine how
And I know you
challenging.
had some questions for me too. Like I know you told me you were coming for me. So if you have questions for me, I know we have some friends online. Please, if you have questions, go ahead and post them now because this is kind of the part that we're on. We'll keep talking for a bit. But do you guys have any questions, any comments, anything for me? Because I've been doing a lot of the talking.
I feel like it's been really balanced. I mean, I think so. I guess one question that you asked um, Rihanna and me is about the whole like talk about racism. And like we talked about that a little bit. And I felt like I didn't really have this very direct conversation with Rihanna about racism. I just didn't, I like tried to kind of just be an open-minded, open-hearted parent. But like if you were the queen of the world and you could just sort of have white people do something like one thing different, it could be about racism or what like whatever, what would that thing be that you would want, mothers and fathers to do with their white children, like here in Littleton, Massachusetts, or in North Dakota, or whatever? Like, what's one thing that you would like to see? I know there's probably 10, but like, what's one thing that would be
Mhm.
the top of your wish list?
Yeah. Wow, that's a really tough question. Oh, I have to think about that. Um, I think education lies with parents, and maybe I'm old school. I think schools go and kind of build on what, but in terms of raising a human being, and I think the parents have a big role in playing in educating kids. And that question came from a post that I had seen where a black young person just posted in tears like, do white people ever talk to their kids about not killing our kids? And because I just saw my mom sit down after this other shooting and talk to my 10-year-old brother about not wearing a hoodie. And if racism is an issue that we're dealing in the world, and part of being a parent is teaching your kid how to navigate, it doesn't have to be let's sit down and have a racism talk, but just sitting down and teaching your kids to be understand that celebrate differences, which you've done, being able to have this conversation and say, I wonder if some parents ever sat down with some of their kids who've done crazy things and said, hey, just in case you wonder, I'm just wondering, this is not right. What's going on in the news right now? This is not right. Because every time a news thing comes up, all the parents are having to talk about it because every kid is on Instagram. It's not right to me that a parent has to talk about racism to the kid who's on like 7, 8, 9, 10 because it pops up. And so the kids are
Mhm.
seeing that and wondering, another black kid my age got killed. Like, what's up with that? And so
Yeah.
parents are having to have conversations as these different things happening. Like, this is what's going on. This is what we're hoping for. This is how you navigate and move in this space. So I wonder if it would be helpful for parents to continue to have those conversations about raising a socially conscious kid. This might not be in your immediate circle, but this is different experiences that people are having. This is why this is wrong, and this is how you can help out. Or this is, every time the news comes out, our parents in general, because I know in the black community, I would like to assume that they're having to process this. Every time the news come up about something, as our parents processing this and talking about this, I think a big part is having these conversations because you're educating your kids and saying, this is not okay. But if the parents don't find a problem with that, they're left to the kids now doing their work on their own. So it doesn't have to be like, let's sit down, let me tell you, 16, 19 or whatever. But it's just, this is something that's happening in the world. It is not okay. And, you know, that's just not cool. So that's what I think. I don't know. I'm sure I have more people probably have more to say about it. So to our friends online, if you had a request for something that you want a or white parent or non-black parent to share, to talk to the kids about the black experience, about like, what would you want them to say? What would you want them to say about that? What would you want them to teach to the kids about that? But that's just my way, my simple way of viewing it. Yeah. Do you guys have any other questions for me? Comments?
Not that I can think of, no.
Yeah.
I think so. Like, I guess this just sort of goes back to the whole the little, like when you went to Littleton High School. Like, I think you made this choice to come to school in Littleton, and I think, I don't know if everybody kind of like that's might be listening or would listen to this kind of knows that story, because you were a Worcester girl and you wanted to have that suburban experience. So I
Yeah.
don't know whether, you have a story that connects to this topic that you'd like to talk about, or, just, I'm kind of throwing that out there as just a,
Um, So I definitely had watched enough movies. Maybe I grew up on Full House and watched The Suburbs and was like, whoa, houses that are like that and schools that are like that. I watched too many teen movies. So I was like, if I have a choice on where to live, I know the city life. I've been a city girl. I'm going to the suburbs, and I'm going for the white picket fence, and I'm going for the school where everybody knows your name. I don't know what theme song that is. And I'm like, I'm about to live my American dream, guys. Like, this is what I'm doing. So I really was excited to move from Littleton. And I know you try to convince me. And for those who don't know, this is my family. So I know I promised you I'll tell you a secret. Now the cat's out of the bag. You say hello to my mom and my sister. So this is my family. I've known them. I mean, I've known Rihanna ever since she was like, I don't know, an itty bitty human being, but she's an amazing young lady. So I was so excited, and I was like, what?
Still on Dad's desk.
Oh, that's so cute. Oh, look at us. Yeah, so young. So you try to discourage me too. You were like, "Are you sure you want to come to the suburbs?" I was like, "No." And at first, I was enamored about, whoa, this is cute. But I started seeing problems. But again, I didn't have the context because I had just moved to America. So I didn't have the context to explain what was happening. And I definitely didn't have the language to explain it. And I think there was an experience where, first of all, when I was in high school, like I dated a guy who was white, and everybody seemed to make a big deal about that relationship, and I just would not understand because I don't know. I made history. I'm probably like the first interracial couple in Littleton, but I'll make history for the best out of bigger things in life. But then I remember there was a situation with a particular girl that I was having issues with, and then her boyfriend. Um, Came to me and threatened me in the hallway. Well, there was two. One of the guys, so it was two girls I having issues with. One of the boyfriend threatened to beat me up and promised to go and beat me up during gym time. So I showed up scared, but I was like, ain't nobody gonna beat me up. I'm so strong. But then the other guy met me in the hallway and yelled at me, and he said something like, I'm gonna send you back to your country. I still remember that image. And the funny part is, I think his girlfriend, I mean, she was Colombian. I was gonna say she was black, but she had a dark complexion like me. So I was just like, how can you be white and date a girl who has dark complexion and you feel who's Colombian and feel that way? But that was horrifying to me, and I did not deal with it the best way. I did something to them that got me in trouble. But I remember when we got to the punishment part, and I've been hearing a lot of people say that black kids are punished more and like given. I got suspended. I got told that I was aggressive, that I was threatening, that several students had come talking about me being threatening. Nobody gave me a chance. And when I tried to explain my story, but do you understand why, I did what I did? This guy threatened Mal and told me he's going to send me to my country. Do you not think that's racist? And that's just like, the worst thing that you could say to a person. But nobody made room for that. It was just more of like, oh, and I didn't get physical with this guy. I just trashed his locker. That's just what I did. God has saved me. I no longer do bad stuff like that. But so in my poor ways of dealing with things, but I remember being like told and coached by my advisor, by the assistant principal. The first thing that kept going was, you are aggressive. You are aggressive. You need to tone down. You need to do that. And I never took anything out of it till I became an adult and became a working woman in the field and started realizing that whenever I got upset, I would tend to like tone down and not react because for some weird reason I got told I was aggressive. I got told that, something about my presence when I'm upset or my reaction when I'm upset, it makes people threatened. I didn't think of anything about it till fast forward now, hearing other women say in the workplace, at school, being told as black women that you're aggressive. There's this whole idea of like a mad black woman. So that picture. So that's one of the experiences I took from there that it took a while for me to understand why I was always trying to like shrink myself in certain spaces and not speak up when I was upset. And it took years. So now, even till today, I have to do a better job of communicating that I'm upset at work and stand up for myself without feeling like, oh no, the fear of like being portrayed as this mad, angry black woman. So
And people need to understand that there's different styles, like that different people have different styles of communication. And that's one thing where if everybody's kind of like from a similar background in school, and then in comes Joyce, it's like,
I roll
like
my eyes.
it's a different person, a different style, different, and so,
Yeah.
they don't, it's again, it's like the bubble, like not knowing how to deal with that. But anyway, we're glad you had a chance to shake up Littleton High School. Littleton's never been the same, Joyce, and we love you.
Yeah.
You're just
Yeah.
a treasure, and we're so proud of you. Mark and I are so proud of everything you've done, and we're so grateful too to Reverend Babish and her family for being like a second family to you out in the Worcester area, and everything you've accomplished. And it's been great to, we feel so honored to have this opportunity to speak with you
Yeah.
about trying to be allies. We're certainly not, you know, we're trying our best, and we love and support you, the Black community, and we will try to have your back, have everyone's backs as in this hard time, this really this time that we can only imagine how difficult it is
Yeah.
for folks. But we
But
care.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you, Rihanna. Thank you, Julie, for coming in and having this conversation. The best gift y'all have ever given me after love, I think, is the gift of allyship, because you validated my existence. That's
Uh,
important to me. I'm going to be a mother of Black kids. I'm probably going to have a Black husband. But who knows? But no matter what the case is, you validate, by being an ally, you validate my existence. And I thank you, because you don't do it for the performance. Ever since I've known you, you've been doing this. But more than ever in this season, I've been grateful, and I go to bed knowing you have my back. And that's just a good feeling to know. And I'm so glad that you've joined us. I love you. And to everyone who's coming tonight, we've seen your comments here and there. We love you. Thank you for joining us. If you have any other questions we have not answered, leave them in the comment box. And if you want us to do one more of these, please leave your comments, and we'll be able to react and respond to you accordingly. But yeah, it was fun. At this point, I think we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. Thank
Thanks
you
for
for
having
coming.
us. We love you.
we love
Yes,
you.
thank
Bye.
Goodbye,
you.
green pastures. We love you.